two types of, you can broadly, there are two types, okay, and these are SRAM and DRAM. Right. So in this diagram that we are referring to for this, yes, Sushma, Hezi, or is it clear now? Is it clear now? It is not. It is not. Is it clear now? Oh, God. Is it clear now? Oh, oh God. Is it okay now? Hazy? Acha, is this hazy? This is clear? Clear now? Okay. So this SRAM is basically static RAM, and this DRAM is basically dynamic RAM. What is the difference between these two? So since we'll try the book again. Now, what is the difference between these two? Static RAM basically consists of the well, it is slightly, it consists of flip flop like flip flop like arrangements for memory cells, okay, where in the flip flop, the Q is the out bar, okay. So I had set that flip flop to other one using the, if you use the RS flip flop, remember the RS flip flop, or if you don't remember the RS flip flop, the RS flip reset and to send to the reset will give you a 0 in the queue, and a 1 in the queue bar. If you set it to, if you send a set signal as, then in case the queue becomes 1, okay, that is the out action, and the queue bar becomes 0. So the consists of kind of arrangements where you can use, and there is obviously it is you have it, and it's kind of an arrangement where you can use these a value. This is a very reliable type of a RAM, very reliable type of a RAM. Okay, it's the what is that in case of A, whereas the reliability is there. Okay, what happens is that in D, it is just basically it acts as a capacitor charge. That's all. It acts as a capacitor charge. So basically a simple transistor memory cell that holds a charge above threshold level or threshold level. So the above threshold level, look at the charge. When you have the above threshold level, you can consider that to be 1, and a below threshold level, you can consider that to be a 0. So it's a very simple device, but obviously, as you can imagine, that this is not as reliable as SRAM. But difference is that DRAM, as you can imagine, is cheaper to make, and this is more expensive. This is reliable but expensive. It's more reliable, of course, because with flip-flop like arrangements, you can be sure that if you send a particular line for setting it to 0 or a 1, okay, or when you have a memory arrangement of cells which contain zeros and ones, you are sending signals so that cells are set to zeros and ones, you can be pretty sure flip-flop like arrangement, the data reflected in the SRAM properly, so there will be lesser errors. It's more reliable and is more fail safe because the arrangement is a bit more complex. But because it's complex, but because it's more complex, because we've got a flip-flop like arrangement, so that means that it's expensive and relatively spacious. And in this case, and in this case, this just a transistorized cell, well, just a transistor memory cell which acts like a capacitor for a charge. How much expensive can it be? It's relatively much cheaper. So it's relatively cheaper, and so memory takes less space to build because obviously the arrangement is much simpler. The elements are number, so it takes less space. But what important, you can have more dense memories with the DRAM. You can have more dense memories with the DRAM. Okay. Now, so that's one thing. But then it is RAM. So why are we saying static and dynamic? Well, because of this flip-flop like arrangement, because of this flip-flop like arrangement, we have that the data store is more stationary. Okay, that is why it's more reliable. Okay, so as opposed to dynamic RAM, which is just a transistor which is controlling a capacitor, a transistor controlling a capacitor. So as opposed to DRAM, where that means in DRAM the data decays over time and hence needs to be refreshed. Is the picture clear now, Sushma? Oh, what about the others? Is it clear to the others? So in case of DRAM, as I was saying, was so it decays over time, and hence and it needs to be refreshed. So there has to be refresher circuit. But never mind. Even then, so it becomes less reliable, obviously, because if you can't. Okay. So what happens is that, yeah. So what happens is, because of the flip. Okay. Let's now go to the now. Is this clear now? It is still not clear. It is clear on my screen. Goodness. Okay, let me see. How can I share this? Okay, just one sec, just one sec. I need to see. I need to see this diagram. Though. No, I'm not talking about. अच्छा, okay. Let me just see if I can. यार क्या हो रहा है? Hmm, let's see. Get something. Share. Can see. How can I send something over? Can I send something to you? Is it settings? Screen. The messages, right? Attachment option. No, I don't think it is. Okay, never mind. Yeah, yeah. आज तो यार दिन ही ऐसा चल रहा है. Okay. Anyways, let me just explain this. So, because of this arrangement, because of just a sec. Now can you see? No, no. Here. Can you see now? Yeah, yeah. I'll explain the diagram. I'll explain the diagram. Yeah, I'll explain the diagram. Okay, you see, there are. So I'm holding it very close, so I can't bring my pen in there. So have a look at this. So you see, on top of that, there is the address line. This address line obviously chooses that particular memory register. Now the data lines are there. There are two data lines in there, and you can see the T1, T2, T3, T4. These arrangements are connected to the power and ground as usual. Um, Powered up flip flops. They contain the 0 or the 1. And so in T5 and T6, we can these two are connected with the data lines. Okay, so this is data T5 is connected with data line D, and this is data line D bar. So that is your in your flip flops, that would be Q, and on the left hand side E would be your Q, right hand side D bar would be your Q bar. So Q bar is someone called Harsh Gautam is okay. Meet him. So this is now what happens is when you are setting it the data, okay, when you're setting it the data, and when you are so it is reflected in the T1, T2, T3, T4 sort of transistors which complement each other. So when you're reading the data and when you're outputting the data, when you're reading the data, obviously the output buffer is on. Read it from data line D, okay, and there you get the output that is stored in T1, T3, T4. Okay, you need these four transistors to reflect on the ones. And in case of the and in case of input, once again, if you change the of T1, T2, T3, T4, regardless of whether or a 1, you can send in a 0 and a 1, and it'll either be the same, or it'll be received once again either back to 0, or if it is 0 then to 1, and if it is 1 then it'll be, if you send a 1 then it'll be to 1, or it will be, if it was a 0. Yeah, I know it's slightly hard to understand. uh, it is not about just going into the details of it. I mean, the way saying it is hard to understand, so you don't have to understand it right at this moment. Just see the arrangement. Just see the arrangement, because I'm not the electronics of it as such for this moment. We don't have the time for this today. We don't need. So we'll talk about on. Just looking at the arrangement. That this is an SRAM management. Okay, the T3, T4 are, they are the ones that hold the data, and the T5 and T6 are used to input and output the data to the data line and from the data line. And this is the address line, and the address line is the one that selects the particular cell, or in other words, the register. As opposed to this, look at the arrangement of this simple DRAM cell. So you have an address line, and this is a transistor. The transistor is the one that controls the capacitor, and the data line is used when the address line is turned on for this particular cell. Then the data line will have a read, and or a write according to whatever the signal is, or whatever the control signal is. Okay, so the control signals will tell whether the transistor will receive a capacitor charge, or will deplete it, or whether it will just and it will be led, or whether it will return to what it is. So the main point about this diagram, okay, to do that, while diagram A, which is a static, and this is dynamic diagram. So you can see this one easy to construct, and because it is smaller in number and it transistor, you can have many different memory cells in one, in one particular area. The dynamic can be dense than static RAMs. Because of this kind of an arrangement, okay, because of this kind of a complex arrangement, the retention of a data in a static RAM, that is why it's called a static RAM, is more or less stable. More or less stable. So that is why it's very reliable. Uh, okay, because you see, this is one cell for DRAM, this is one for SRAM, right? Six transistors, again this. So it takes up less amount of space. So that is why it can be more dense. It can be more dense. Not only that, this simple construction, it is also more cheap. So it is to buy it also in quantities. 4 GB, 16, but they are constructed. They are basically dynamic. The reason for that, uh, again hazy. I know this. Oh, it can be because of the fact that uh, because of the fact that it is a more or less transistor uh, with the that is it can be constructed on mass, cheap, and that is why the RAMs that we buy today, they are mostly your RAMs. Okay, we have DDR RAMs, which is external DRAMs. Okay, we don't have static RAMs. Static RAMs, on the other hand, they are, because of this reason, as far as memory goes, they are less dense. A small amount of space will contain a memory cells in DRAM, but not so many memory cells of SRAM. Um, anything, at least by a factor of 6, would be lesser. But they're also more complex to construct, so they're more expensive as well. So because of this complex construction and expensive build, we import a lot of SRAM. This can be used, but because of the reliability, can be used in specific where it is very necessary for the system to be very the data is an absolutely critical part we are storing and using, whether and we can use these SRAM, those kind of systems. It may be that in our general purpose computers, that part of it is part of it is DRAM. Okay, but otherwise, what happens is sometimes a part of the cache we talked about in case of the memory hierarchy, yeah, it may be arrangement that those are of S cells, whereas the standard main memory are constructed out of the dynamic memory cells. It may be the case. Okay, so that is one static RAMs can be used. Other way, there is a lot of say for example, if you're buying a server or if you're buying a very powerful computer, a very powerful server computer, then money may not be that much. Obviously, it has to be economic, but more but even after the economic, something to do with safety of the data and security of the data, in the sense that, or rather, I should say, reliability of the data, sense that very crucial amount of data may be stored in this RAM. And so in those cases, for those very powerful computers, you may actually be using static RAMs in dynamic RAMs, at least partially. Okay. What that the transit is used to control capacitor. Okay, so uh, you have a see, it depends upon what kind of capacitor you are actually making. If you are looking at capacitor that radios and stuff, don't think about that, because those capacitors are for very large charges. These capacitors are very small capacitors, so they have to little amount of charge. You see, because when you are talking about, say, the capacitor that you deal with in a radio, okay, so what kind of voltage are you dealing with? 220 volts, right? So a lot of charge goes in there. Those capacitors, the capacitors that you have in tube lights, etc. Okay, those are so don't compare that with the inside RAM cells. This small capacitor. This is a capacitor. Yeah, it holds a charge. So if it's a small charge, then you need a small capacitor. Yeah, go on. Data store. Yeah, not yeah. It's definitely random. Yeah, yeah. Just as you have a flip flop, right? So you have a flip flop or a register. The computer registers are made out of these flip flops and the latches and flip flops. Okay, so if it's obviously timed and if it's a bit better constructed, we call it otherwise we call it a latch. So let's say flip flops. Now these SRAM made out of these these flip flops. Okay, what happens that when you put a there, as long as the current is turned on, it stays stationary. But in case of DRAM, it is controlling, but it is obviously a small micro level, a very small capacitor, because it's holding a small charge. So what happens? Capacitor is losing charge. Capacitors are always losing charge. That if it's a big capacitor, it loses little amount of charge over time, bit by bit. Depletion takes a long time. But if it's a small check happens, it will lose its charge in no time. Okay, so that is exactly why in DRAM, data that you store a one. Okay, so it is above a threshold value. But the charge is depleting, the charge, and by the time you read it, the charge has gone below the threshold level, and you will read a zero instead of a. So that is why that is which which will be timed. So it will be able to, within the time that the capacitor takes to go below the threshold value, it will be able to change the values, or rather refresh the values again. So that circuit you need with the DRAM. But then again, what happens is as you keep on using the RAM, once you use the RAM, you really change the RAM. Do you computer there is a RAM there? Someone in the class now. Um, so there is this RAM in there, and you put your RAM inside the computer, and what happens? You just use it for 10 years, right? You don't really change the RAM. You can obviously, if it goes bust, you have to change it. Otherwise, you don't change it. You may increase it. So if you have 2 GB ROM RAM, you can change it to 4 GB by putting in more RAM chips, which will act as if it is a continuous RAM. The arrangement that we showed yesterday, I mean the day before yesterday. But otherwise, you don't really. So what happens when you are trying to use it again and again and again? The capacitors they are actually they obviously lose their potential. I mean, the capacitors are going bad, if you like. So the charge capacity in those capacitors they will decrease. So over time, the time that you and what about the circuits, the refreshing circuits? They are for some time, but the time that is required now is much faster because the capacitor have gone bad. So over time the RAM will give you a lot of problems regarding the reliability because it won't be able to hold as long. um, that is why there's some more error control. Whenever you're storing memory, you need to have control codes for checking whether like even makers and stuff. You need checking whether the data that you've stored in is decayed to uh, form an error or not. You always do that. So those checks will have to be improved if the RAM is as the RAM gets older. So it is slightly more annoying that way. But the point, because of its density, because of its cheap build, it is something that can be produced en masse for people like you and me. Otherwise, SRAM very expensive for us to afford a very big amount of memory. Okay, all right. So unfortunately, I would have liked to say what questions, but unfortunately, it is 11 o'clock. You have your Python class. So sorry about today. We'll meet again on Monday. Okay, and I'll put this video up on the net. Okay. I've already put the other two videos, so please have a look at that and report to me. If you have anything to say, just phone me up and tell me. And the new guys come, yeah. And the new guys, there are some new girls and guys. So welcome to you all. Um, See you in the next class. Bye.